Good morning, everyone. As you're joining us, please do pop your camera on this morning. It's always good to see who we've got in the virtual room with us. So morning, everyone. I'm just watching as everybody appears, so please do give us all a wave, say who you are in the chat. Let's try and recreate the feeling of being in a room, even though we're in about 30 different rooms. I hope everyone's doing well today. Lots of smiley faces, which is super. This is when you realise that you should have tidied your room better. Okay. Well, I'm just looking around the room. I see that we've got lots of faces. So we've got some wonderful stuff to get through today. So I'm just going to do my little introduction so that we can then get into the main part of the session. And thank you to Claire for saying who she is and why she's with us today. Please do all feel free to do that. So welcome to today's event. I'm Beverly Vaughan and I'm the director of the Arise Innovation Hubs. And today's event is hosted by Arise Innovation Hubs in partnership with Medilink Midlands and TBAT. So this is the first event in a series of events for an exciting project that we're delivering together with the aim of supporting entrepreneurs and startups and helping you all with your business needs. And where we go in the future, well, we've got some things we know we're doing and some things we'll be listening to what you say to us so we can design those next sessions. We're absolutely thrilled to see such a wide cross-section of people joining us today. Lovely to have some of the clinical entrepreneurs with us, some of the Arise businesses that I can see with us today. And also delighted to welcome TBAT to deliver our workshop, Funding 101 for Innovative Projects. So before I hand over to our wonderful speaker today, I've got a few housekeeping announcements. This event is being recorded for the purposes of marketing and subject to no technical difficulties. Oh, the day where there's no technical difficulties. If you don't want to be recorded, please just ensure your camera remains off. Our event today is going to consist of a presentation from Ian, followed by a Q&A, which is open to all of you. And really the purpose of today is to make it feel like a friendly virtual room where you can ask those questions. So please do make sure you do ask those questions. To ask a question, indeed that's a very important point, please type it into the chat for us, telling us your name and your affiliation, and we'll try and answer all of the questions, as many as possible. So feel free to send them in as we go along as the thought processes occur to you, because that's how I work. If I don't write it when I think it, I forget it. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our speaker, and delivering the session today is Ian Davey. Ian Davey is a senior consultant at TBAT, and he's going to tell you much more about TBAT in a second. He's got a background in mechanical engineering and has worked providing consultancy for 13 years. I'm hoping I was allowed to say how many years. He has a particular focus on supporting manufacturers and has previously worked at Rolls-Royce and Pera Consulting. He continues to support manufacturers through TBAT by providing advice, consultancy, R&D tax credits and grant support. So there's a huge range of things that Ian really has the Rolodex going on with. So Ian, without further ado, let me hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. Right, so if I just share my screen, can everybody see that? Funding your innovation? Good, marvelous. Okay, so TBAT has been around for about 20 years, just over 20 years. We're a consultancy company that works with innovation companies across the UK to help access innovation funding. So we're just under 30 people, but growing. And kind of services that we offer are anything to do with kind of allowing you to do what you want to do with your project. So early stage grant funding. So where do you want to spend your money? Once you've spent that money, you can claim R&D tax credits. Once you're setting up a facility, you want to look at capital allowances. You maybe want some investment, which is where SEIS, EIS support comes in. If you want to create a video games tax relief, we can do that for you. It's probably unlikely. And then right through to once you're selling your services, and if you've got a patent related to it, then you can get additional corporation tax benefits related to that. So what is grant funding? So it's about, there's various sources. There's both local enterprise funding and national groups, but what is in accessing UK innovation funding. So it's typically Innovate UK and other funding calls like that. So it's around supporting your tech development. I mean, the purpose of the grant funding, the government's quite clear. You know, they want the UK to be a leading R&D country, and their target is 2.4% of GDP to be spent on R&D. So this is their way of incentivizing that into businesses. So why bother with funding? It's a fantastic way to get your projects started or progressed. So typically, you know, if you're looking at kind of free money, and that can cover, on most grant funding calls, that would cover things like salaries, materials utilised, capital equipment, travel costs, IP costs, overheads, as well as subcontractor costs. So it can cover a wide range of elements of what you're going to be paying for your project. And it also means for typical Innovate UK funding rates is 70%. For early stage projects, but depending upon what you're looking at, it can be typically between 50 and in some cases 100% funded. So it's extremely useful. Now, what's important? It's green light for investment. So why we say that is if you've been assessed by an organisation like Innovate UK, and they think that your project is good enough to go ahead with funding, then that's really a kind of rubber stamp from a government organisation to say your tech is really good, which is great for then taking it to the market and sort of saying, look, I want to get investment against this project. And that's a superb way of kind of getting independent view of what your project is. It's a good way of kind of stimulating growth, stimulating collaboration, I mean, where you're working with other companies and you can incorporate those into the project. And a good source of to talk to with that is the KTNs, knowledge transfer networks, where they can make connections with different organisations, both commercial and research institutes. And it reduces your risk. You know, if you've got 70% of the cost covered in your project, then that reduces how much you've got to put in to cover that. There are a wide range of different funding bodies out there, both UK and Horizon Europe, which we can still access at the moment. Now, under Innovate UK, which is probably what everybody's heard of, there are a number of different programs, things like Faraday Challenge, First of a Kind, which is aimed at rail. There's also other programs as well, like biomedical catalyst, which opens, the next round we think opens in May, which is probably more relevant to the audience we're talking about now. What we would say is, with any of these calls, it's good to go into a themed call, which is where they have a specific idea about what kind of projects they want to support. Innovate UK do have what they call the Smart Round, but that's open to anybody to apply, and it does tend to be quite oversubscribed. What it would be worth doing is registering for our email. So when we know there's a grant funding call coming out from any one of these organisations and more, then we will send out emails saying, well, okay, this is opening on such and such a day, it's closing here, this is the theme, this is what you're eligible for. So it's a great way of being kept informed without having to do the searching yourself. This is just kind of a landscape of what calls are out at the moment. So some highlights for yourselves as kind of clinicians and healthcare. There's the SBRI call ovary that closes late May for medicines dementia. You've also got there's trying to look to see what else there was. I thought there was another one in there. And obviously, if it doesn't fit in with a themed call, you've got the smart grants, which currently goes through and closes in June. And that continually opens and closes. So there's always an opportunity to go into that. Not preferred. If you can go into a themed like medicines and dementia, then that's ideal. Occasionally there are calls that come out that are kind of what they call bilateral. So, there are calls out or have been out for projects partnered with other countries. So Singapore, Canada, Africa as a continent, Switzerland and South Korea have all had kind of joint programs where they're providing some support their end and there's support our end, if you're looking at a joint program internationally. So grant funding eligibility. So what will Innovate UK look at? So they will look at projects at different stages. So that could be a feasibility study where you've really just got very early stage project and you really want to just test out the theory that this is going to work. So we're talking kind of TRL levels 1 to 2. That can be funded at 70%. If you're looking at industrial research, then that's kind of a TRL 2 to 4. Again, that can be funded at about 70%. If you're then looking at experimental development, and that might be looking at a trial, then you're looking at kind of TRL 5 to 6. For an SME, that would kind of be funding at about 45%. So you can break down your projects into different stages. So you can go for a feasibility study, and at a later stage, you can then still apply for an industrial research project. So you don't have to bundle it all together and have a single one big project. Projects can last anywhere from 6 to 36 months. And obviously there has to be a lead, and obviously you can also have collaborative partners in there, and they could be other commercial businesses as subcontractors or research institutes like university or the catalysts can help with different projects as well. So looking at some of the eligibility criteria. So first off, you have to be registered as a UK business. It can be a business of any size. Obviously, if you're accessing an SME grant, and most of you probably will be because you're early stage, then you're looking at under 250 people in an organisation. You need to be clear about what's your identified industry or target market and what's your route to market. And then, have you applied for grant funding before? Now, with any of the Innovate UK type projects, you can actually apply twice. So if you get refused on the first time of project, you can actually reapply at a later date. It's always good to talk to the funding body itself. They have regular briefing events on different calls that come out. Recommended to attend those for yourselves to sort of see what they're talking about, and if possible, talk to somebody from Innovate UK or whoever the funding call body is. So technical eligibility, do you have the freedom to operate? And one of the things that Innovate UK is really looking for is new to the world kind of stuff. They don't want to fund somebody, there's Fred down the road that's got this offering and you want to match what they're doing. They won't fund those kind of projects. So it has to be groundbreaking kind of new R&D that you're operating in. As I talked about, TRL levels, depends on what TRL level you are, which is technology readiness level. What is the challenge solved by your technology? And is that a commercial viability? So by developing the tech that you're doing, are you going to be able to take that to market? And then we'll be looking at, do you actually have the expertise in-house or through your subcontractors to actually to develop what it is that you're proposing to do? So do you have the skill set? Project eligibility. Obviously, you have to identify a suitable funding competition. And do you need partners or a consortium? And we always recommend start setting up partners and consortiums early, even before the project calls, the funding calls come out. Because the earlier you get kind of commitment from your consortium, the better. Where's the project duration? As I say, you can go from 6 to 36 months. That's largely led by how much money you're spending. If you're going to be spending, 100, 150, 200,000 pounds project, then you're probably looking at 6 months. If you're up at around 2 million, you're probably looking at 3 years. What are the risks involved? So you have to understand, well, actually, what do you know now and what don't you know? So what are you actually researching to make sure that you're solving all the issues that you have with your project to move that forward? And does your project align to the scope? One of the things we do say is that don't try, if you've got an idea of a project and you want to go for funding, don't morph that project into something else just to fit into that call. So make sure that the project you want to work on stays as that project, and don't try and sort of fit it in, shoehorn it into something. Top tips with Innovate UK applications. There are a standard 10 questions, whether you're going for £100,000 funding or £2 million funding. And we see a number of different applications where companies have prepared it themselves, they've been rejected by Innovate UK, and fundamentally they don't answer the questions that have been asked. So it is tight because you only get a certain number of words against each question, but make sure you answer all the questions that are posed on each of the 10 sections. And in order to do that, make use of good formatting options so that you can kind of cram as much as possible into that. Avoid using acronyms and technical jargon. Try and kind of explain it simply. The assessors of who they're looking at your project may not be experts in what you're doing. So therefore you have to kind of explain it in reasonable terms, and leave plenty of time for writing and reviewing and uploading. There's been occasions where companies have left uploading to the last minute and not got the funding because they failed to get it in time. And once the deadline hits, that's it. You've lost the opportunity for that call. And we recommend at least 6 weeks and preferably 4 weeks to prepare a good application. So you need plenty of time to do all of that, because there's a lot to go through. It's not just the bid writing itself. You've got to plan the costings, you've got to plan what the project plan looks like, who's delivering what's the quarterly delivery plan, what are the risks. So there's a lot of background information that is needed before you actually get to the bid itself. So plenty of time is needed. One of the other elements is that cash flow projection. So if you're looking at a project size of between 250,000 to £1 million, you need to have available to be able to cash flow the project somewhere between 83 and 166,000 as kind of guide. So you need that kind of in the bank to be able to for Innovate UK or other organisations to assess that you've got the means to be able to carry this project out. The reason for that is typically you will spend money on a 3-month basis and then draw down the funding against that spend. So you have to be able to cash flow those 3 months at a time before you actually get the funding back from the funding call. How does TBAT work? Well, we can do various different things. We can look at workshops to help formulate what those projects are. We can look at the bid writing document. We can do a lighter touch review and amend. We can do an application review where you've actually submitted already and maybe got knocked back. And with Innovate UK, you get some very good feedback, as to why your project wasn't granted. So, and then we also help with the grant claim management, which is the element of reporting on a quarterly basis back to HMRC, or not HMRC, back to Innovate UK, which can be quite time consuming and needs to be spot on. So, but that element of the cost can actually be built into the project, which in turn is then funded. I don't know if anybody's got any quick questions on grants. before I move on to kind of R&D tax credits? That was a bit of a fly through. Okay, I'll move on. Right, so R&D tax credits. So R&D tax credits is different to grant funding. So with grant funding, you're applying for money that you're going to be spending. Whereas R&D tax credits is an HMRC scheme where you are claiming back money from HMRC for money you have spent in the past. So you've already spent the money and then you're applying to sort of say, well, okay, I'd like to get some corporation tax benefits associated with it. So with HMRC, what they're looking to do is fund projects that achieve an advance in overall knowledge or capability in the field of science and technology. That sounds great. What it means is you're resolving technical problems. So where you've got a project and you're looking to develop something, and that can be a product, process, or a service or software, there's actually an uncertainty how you're going to do that, and that's what they're looking to fund to support you. And again, this is all aimed at helping kind of GDP 2.4% target of R&D. There are two schemes. Now this is until 31st of March because some of these rates are actually changing. Now I'm including this because the change at the end of the month, but actually you can go back 2 full years on making an R&D claim. So these rates still apply for the periods leading up until now. So the definition of an SME is slightly different. It's 500 employees instead of 250. And actually what you can get back for every £100 you spend on the SME scheme, where you're self-funding your project, then if you're profitable, about 25% back of your overall costs. If you're heavily loss-making, you can get back 33% of your costs. And if you're around about break-even and cash in, it can be down as low as 18% currently. And so it's good funding rates. Now, I'll mention the RDEX scheme because that is relevant potentially, because I'll explain that later. That's for companies that are over 500 employees. On both schemes, there's no minimum R&D spend. On the RDEX scheme, there's no upper limit. There is an upper limit on the SME scheme, but it's £7.5 million euro per project, which is an enormous amount. We've never hit that. The RDEX scheme currently gives a benefit back of about 10% for every £100 you spend. But I'll explain why that's relevant a bit later. So with both of the schemes, you can include staff costs, materials costs, software costs, what they call externally provided workers, which is where you're employing an agency person that you then directly manage. And you can include higher education institutes like research institutes, catapults, and universities. The only difference between the two schemes is with the SME scheme, you can include subcontractor costs where you get a limited business to help you out, but with the RDEX scheme, you can't include subcontractor costs. So that's one of the biggest differences between the two schemes. Now, where I talked about costs that you could utilise in a grant, things like capital expenditure and overheads and travel, they are ineligible costs within an R&D claim. So there are differences between what you can claim between the two. As I said, the RDEX scheme could be eligible to you as an SME. So where you are grant funded by a company or by an organisation like Innovate UK, then you can't claim under the SME, but you can claim under the RDEX scheme. So even though you might have had a 70% funding rate on a project, you can then effectively top that up by up to another 10% of eligible costs through the RDEX scheme. So, but this also applies where you've been subcontracted for R&D by a large company. Now, this could be applied to, say, I don't know, NHS contracts you to do some work. You know, NHS will be effectively a large company. And there are funding schemes like the SBRI, which is 100% funded, which this would apply to as well. So you can kind of, even though you've got 100% funding, you can add another 10% on top of that to effectively make a profit on it, which is probably not intended, but that's the consequence. Now, there's a big thing at the moment. So up until 18 months ago, HMRC were pretty much just passing, I would say, just passing through claims and without much kind of attention to them. Over the last 18 months, HMRC have been under pressure to put those R&D claims under control because there is quite a bit of evidence that there's fraud or boundary pushing happening, particularly on the SME scheme. So as a result of that, if you put in your R&D claim into HMRC, they are asking more questions, and that can be quite time consuming. So it's important that when you submit an R&D claim, that you submit a technical report along with your submission to evidence why your project is eligible for tax credits. Why does it fit that purpose? Currently, a report is not mandatory, but it is actually quite essential. And then they will also then follow that up with making sure that the finances that you've utilised in the claim are correct. I'd be careful using just a straight accountant to prepare your R&D claim, because they don't understand the technical elements of what it is that you're doing. And I have seen occasions where the accountants have misunderstood which scheme the claim can go through, and that can be quite easily picked up by HMRC, and you go into a compliance check. There are some changes going through. So from the 1st of April, the SME scheme, as part of this addressing fraud, is they're actually lowering the value of the scheme. So all costs up until the 31st of March apply on the higher rates, the 130% and the credit rate of 14.5, which is where you cash in losses. But after the 1st of April, that goes down to 86% as an additional deduction on your accounts, and a cash in rate of 10%, which means that the value of the SME scheme goes down to between 9 and 21% instead of 18 and 33%. On the other way around, the RDEC, they're actually increasing the rate. So they're going from 13% to 20%, which is what's applied, but it means that you're now looking at an overall benefit of about 15% for an R&D claim, because they want to stay competitive with other international schemes out there. And they recognise that the RDEC scheme, mainly applied to the large companies, is not competitive enough to attract R&D into the UK. Data and cloud computing costs become eligible after the 1st of April. They're not eligible before. And the overseas subcontractor costs, so where you subcontract and this is typical in software development, where you subcontract to a lower cost country like India or Bulgaria, where there's software houses, those costs will become ineligible after the 1st of April 2024. They were going to look at it 1st of April this year, but in the budget last week, they actually changed that to delay that for a year, to allow companies to kind of restructure where their R&D is. And that's to encourage subcontractor in the costs in the UK will still be eligible. Obviously, corporation tax rate is changing. So over £250,000 profit, you pay 25%. That will change values that you can get back as a benefit. HMRC also want to understand better what the R&Ds that you're doing and how you're claiming it. So it will become compulsory that you have to notify HMRC if you've used a tax agent like TBAT or another organisation. You have to notify HMRC that you've done that. There will also become a requirement to pre-register if you're making to look making to look a claim. That's actually registering 6 months after your year end to say I want to claim for the previous year. So it's kind of a post-registration rather than a pre-registration. They're also looking at a digital submission, which I'll go on to in a second. And they also want to make sure that a senior person at the company, doesn't need to be a director, but a senior person at the company has signed off on what the R&D claim is that's being put forward. So it's just making sure that there's better controls in place. Additional changes. So in the budget last week, they announced that because they're lowering the SME rate, they've actually identified what they call R&D intensive industries. So where your spend is 40% or more of your expenditure, then that allows you to get in a higher rate of benefit. Because if currently maximum would be 21%, but if you're an intensive industry, it can be 27 pence in the pound. It's not quite back at the 33 pence in the pound, but it's better than the 21. They are looking at combining the two schemes, SME and RDEC. There's consultation that's just finished on that, and potentially that's going to be from the 1st of April 2024. And again, in the budget last week, they announced that what they call an additional information form, which is effectively how you're going to report your technical elements of your projects and your finances, will become compulsory, and it's an online form from the 1st of August 2023. So what I would say is if you've got an R&D claim that you're going to be submitting later this year, it's better if you can get it in before the 1st of August, because the current mechanism along with the report is actually going to be easier rather than copying it into an online portal. Any questions on R&D tax credits? Silence. I've answered everything. So again, just a quick reminder of what we do as services, and it's about supporting you, understanding what you're doing, and on a wider scale. TBAT launched our first innovation challenge last year, and any company can attend. We have a series of workshops. The first one is on March 23rd, which is about finance, and this is about supporting companies going through all elements of innovation. You know, how do you finance it? How do you get your right people? You know, what's your product development process look like? How are you going to protect that? You know, what's the commercialization look like? So there is a series of workshops that anybody can attend, but then there's actually a competition that anybody can apply to, and there will be a £5,000 prize to that, and a series of packages from our partners, which is around all of these subjects. So it's a great support. There's a picture there of kind of last year's entrance, the 10 people that kind of went to the final, and it ran really, really well last year. So I'd really recommend having a look at that. And there's a link down there at the bottom of the page just to get some more information on that. And that leads on to questions. And that's about half an hour that I think I've stuck to.
Thank you very much, Ian. I mean, that was a real whistle-stop tour. I could see nodding faces, I could see heads being scratched, I could see things being written down as we were going along. So all signs of thought processes in action. Obviously, we've got quite a varied audience today. Some people are sort of further down that SME journey than others. But really now's the opportunity for people to come in and sort of ask those burning questions. We don't have any questions yet. So I'm very, very keen for people to really speak up, because this is your session. I suppose, Ian, from your point of view, where is it in that innovation pipeline where people should start to look at Innovate and move away from the UKRI umbrella of research programmes? Do you think there's a particular TRL level or a certain part on the product journey? That's probably a good starting point.
It's all stages, really, you know, before you're ready to hit that commercial button and start actively selling. You know, so all the calls out there will fund at different stages, right through from I've got an idea and I really want to test whether this is even feasible, right through to doing trials out there. And what I would say is think about what that project looks like at kind of all stages, and think about where you could be accessing funding as early as possible. And the call may not be available now, but the only problem with Innovate UK is they're not very good at announcing what their calls are over the next 12 months. They kind of spring on you all of a sudden. Now, obviously, you've got the regular SMART grant call, which anybody can apply into, but have a conversation with us. We'll have a look to see what your project is. We'll give you an assessment as to whether we think that's a good grant funding project to have a look at, and then it's maybe looking at, well, actually, what's the best options out there available. So the earlier you have those conversations and earlier you set up what that project looks like and who your partners are, the better a position you're going to be in to apply for that funding call when it comes out. And some of these calls can come up quite quickly and go quite quickly. You know, they might only be open for 6 to 8 weeks if you actually to make an application. You know, so if you're starting to think about your project in that period, it's almost too late. You need to be thinking about it beforehand.
No, these things take time, and I see that actually we're starting to get a few questions in about how we contact you, and we'll come on to some of the things that are going to come next after this session when I wrap things up. But I've got a question here from Jim Kelly. I don't know, Jim, are you on camera at the moment? Give us a wave if you are. Lovely to see you, Jim. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Very helpful. Some of the bits about R&D tax credits are a little bit in the future for our company. We're just a very new startup, but the grants are certainly something very, very important and what we're thinking about applying for at the moment. We're really keen to explore 2 avenues. One is B2C with our new patent pending product, and also B2B through the NHS Innovation and Clinical Entrepreneur Programme. But we think it's going to fly much quicker, obviously, without all the NHS red tape. And so we're looking really to start to tool up and get some product out there as quickly as possible. Now, we're kind of stuck between having prototypes that are 3D printed and then having to spend a lot of money on tooling to get aluminium tooling. So is there a halfway house with your technical background between those 2 things that we should be exploring? Are there any grants specifically for the actual tooling costs rather than, or do they always have to be linked to a project?
No. So if you look at what they call local enterprise partnerships, they are there to support their local business environment. And they will quite often have capital expenditure grants to support you. Now, that can include tooling, because obviously you can capitalize tooling as within your accounts. So, and they might offer funding rates of 30 or 40%, which is not going to cover a vast majority of what your costs are, but it's certainly a contribution.
Okay.
So I'd certainly look at those. It just depends on what your local enterprise partnership focus is. If you're in Derbyshire, which is where I live, and under them, they've 20% of all companies are manufacturers. There's lots of manufacturing support. You're a bit buggered if you go to Cheshire. There's no manufacturing support in Cheshire. So it just depends on which area you're in and what's available to you.
And what about 100% grant funding opportunities? I mean, you mentioned SBRI.
Yeah, so SBRI wouldn't fund purely capital. They would look at it as part of the overall development of the project. So they would be interested in an earlier stage project. They might well cover capital within that. So if you're looking at something like prototype tooling to get you going, then that could be an option. So when you're thinking about what you need as your project, think about, well, actually all the costs that you've got to include.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
And the other question that just occurred to me that you just mentioned is about you're not ready to do your R&D tax credits yet. So if your year is January to December, if you can get your accounts ready in January after your year end, then you can submit those accounts in January and get a cash back from HMRC, having never paid any corporation tax, as money back as early as kind of April after your year end. So get your accounts ready, submit your R&D claim as early as possible after your year end, and you'll get your money back from HMRC that much quicker, rather than having to wait 9 months till you put your accounts in and then get your money kind of around December time.
Thank you.
We all like to get money back quicker right now, especially. Thank you so much, Jim, for your question. And that's got us going. We've got another question that's come in from one of our Arise companies. Taz, do you want to ask the question, or shall I go ahead and continue? You're not camera on at the moment.
Hi, Bev. No, I'm happy to ask the question. I realise there's 2 Tazes in this conversation.
Oh, yes, there are. Well, I mean you.
So I'm assuming you mean me, Taz.
I do mean you, Taz.
Brilliant. Sorry, I've got my video off. I had it on at the start, but the little one ran through the meeting in the background, so I just turned it off. I am still here. Thank you, Ian. A really, really great presentation. Good to kind of sort of understand more around this. I guess ours is a slightly different approach. We're a web development agency, and we work with a number of innovative startups and organizations who are building new digital products. Anything from sort of medical industry to sort of various different sort of industries that we work with. I guess my question comes from a slightly different approach, where we're building, or we're quite heavily involved with them in the sort of the innovation of these digital products, in the case that we're building them ourselves. Is there any support for funding available to us as an agency, or is it really limited to our clients? So slightly different direction.
Yeah, no, so there are 3 scenarios that could be relevant. So where you're working with an SME and they're paying you to do that development, they can obviously include their money they pay to you into their claim, so you can't claim.
Okay.
Where you're working for a large enterprise, so over 500 employees, and they contract you to do some R&D, then you can claim for those costs that you've incurred under the RDEC scheme, which is back that 10% and future 15% of your costs. But there's a third scenario where, you know, an SME might come to you and say, well, I want you to deliver this project, and you've got a fixed price contract to do that. And you then suddenly discover, well, actually, there's some fundamentals that you have accounted for, and you need to then do some additional research yourself outside of that project delivery. That means you're doing effectively self-funded R&D. Now, in those circumstances, as long as we can kind of show that you're developing your own IP and understanding as part of that, it might not be patented IP, it might just be your internal IP, that you can then claim for those additional costs that you hadn't anticipated under the SME scheme claim. So there's 3 different scenarios.
Okay, that's, yeah, really interesting to know. I think actually a lot of what we do does fall into the 3rd scenario you described there. So I guess there is probably something for us to further look at really here, to be honest, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant.
Thank you, Ian.
No problem.
Thank you, Taz. It's good to get, you know, questions coming from different directions in terms of how we think about innovation and funding. So we've got a few clinical entrepreneurs who are camera on and camera off. Have we got any questions from you guys? Because you're at this sort of really exciting stage, you've been through all your boot camps, you know, what are you going to do next? Tell us.
Well, while people are thinking about that, because there's a couple of questions up there about looking at a one-to-one sessions, and there will be a link that comes out where you can book a one-to-one session with TBAT, likely with Esther, who should have been on this call, and then she can kind of field those, have a 30-minute session with you to talk about what your project is and give you a bit of direction about what the possibilities are going forward.
Yes, so we will send information to all of you about that, which is an excellent personalised way of having those questions. Claire, you've raised your hand.
Hi Beverly, and thank you Ian for such an interesting talk. Yes, I'm one of the new NHS clinical entrepreneurs and I'm very, very early stage, so this is all completely new to me.
Yep.
So I have a couple of questions actually, which I think that a lot of us NHS clinical entrepreneurs are kind of in similar stages of development. I noticed that Taz has asked a question about funding options that are available for solo entrepreneurs currently in idea stages, which is pretty much where I am as well. So I've written an evidence-based burnout recovery program. It's currently existing as a set of presentations and a workbook, but I want to put it into an app and then use it to help with retention of staff within the NHS, but this could also be used within the corporate sector. My question is, I did notice there was a grant that was purely aimed at occupational health where the deadline was actually this week. So I've missed a deadline for that, which is really frustrating because I would have fit beautifully into that.
Yeah, and that's half the problem with grant funding.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a timing issue, and if the right project comes up with the right grant funding call, and it's a bit of potluck in that respect.
Yeah. So my first question is, do you think that something like that would fit into, would that be successful for one of the SMART grants? And also, what's your advice for people that are still very early on in the ideas stage? What do we need to prioritise at this particular point in time?
So from the point of view of SMART, then anything goes with a SMART grant call. So yes, it would fit into the SMART grant. The problem with SMART grants is there was a round recently where something like 2,400 applications went in and only 5% of all projects got funded. So it can be really, really tough. So, just be warned that, that's time consuming to apply for. From the point of view of understanding what you're getting your project ready for grant funding, it's really having a clear plan as to how long is it going to take you to do that, who needs to be involved, who's got the expertise, what are the elements that you need to develop, what do you know and what don't you know. And it's really having all of that in place such that you're ready to go when that grant funding call comes up. I mean, as I said earlier, we do sort of workshops with companies at very early stages, and sometimes those workshops, which is a day, and we work through a lot of those things and help you identify what you do need to focus in on. And actually what we do is, yes, you pay for that workshop, but actually if you then go ahead and apply for a grant on that particular project, then we'll discount the grant funding fees by what you've paid for the workshop, so you don't pay any more. And that's a great way of kind of getting guidance as to what do you know and what you don't know.
I think it's safe to assume I don't know anything, if I'm being completely honest. I've actually booked a call with Esther already next week, so that's something that I can talk to her in more detail. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's helpful, thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Claire, and wishing you the best of luck with those grant applications. They're daunting at the best of times, but there's a certain kind of joy that you get when one's successful. So moving on, we've got another hand up. We've got a hand up from, and I do hope that I'm going to get the pronunciation correct. Let me try. Sidilea? Please correct me, I'm so sorry. I think you might be on mute.
No, nothing's coming through.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, fantastic. I had some audio problems. My question is the following. So I'm a nurse by background. I'm trying to set up my company. Initially, because of the IR35 was to be scratched, my plan was to generate cash flow with my work, but unfortunately, they've made a mess, and so I can't generate cash flow that way. So I'm trying to look at how can I generate cash flow, which probably will be with projects, with funding from projects then. So I was just wondering, as a solo entrepreneur, what will be the best way? I'm considering actually moving my company to the EU rather than staying in the UK. So I wanted to ask your perspective in terms of funding, whether it's best to stay in the UK or actually going and swapping the company, because at the moment, IR35 is a mess. is creating a lot of problems. I can't generate cash flow that way. The only way for me to generate cash flow now is putting my own money or just call for proposals. So I just wanted to ask your opinion on that and whether maybe the EU now seems a better place to be, considering all the corporate tax and all those things that are coming through.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the UK is trying to offer as an attractive as possible destination to do your R&D. But if you've got kind of options to have a look at kind of other countries and what support they're offering, I don't know what that looks like in different countries. You'd have to kind of work out that. You're saying as a sole trader, are you limited? Are you registered as limited?
Yeah,
right, okay, so you are registered as a limited business, because as a sole trader, that's the one element where you can't apply for grant funding or any support in any areas of local enterprise partnership, R&D tax credits. It doesn't offer you any facilities to do that. And yeah, I mean, it's just working out what gives you the best options and opportunities. I mean, I know that from an EU point of view, accessing those vastly bigger grant funding projects, which can be £5-10 million for projects, which is probably a bit early at the moment, is easier in the UK because they're not very keen on working with UK at the moment and partnering up. So that is a tough call. But yeah, I can't offer any advice directly because I don't know which country you're looking at, and I don't know what the benefits are to go to that country.
Okay, but I thought maybe you had an understanding about the EU funding as well. Maybe you would know a little more where is best to kind of, if it's stay in the UK or actually go into the EU, because I'm Portuguese, so I can easily move back to Portugal.
No. So from an EU point of view, it would definitely be easier to access EU funding from Portugal. Yes, you can do it in the UK, but it is harder as it stands at the moment. And it's certainly bigger amounts of money. There's different schemes. There's the SME instrument, which is aimed at, and it's quite large sums of money as well. So a lot of these projects start at a kind of £1 million and above. So which is great support. But yes, it would be easier in Portugal to access EU money than it is here.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much.
That's right.
Such a shame to hear that we're sort of encouraging people to go and apply from Portugal, but it's a wonderful place. Lisbon is lovely. Thank you very much for your question. And I realise the clock is ticking, but we have time for one more question before I do my wrap up. So thank you for all the comments on the chat. Please do take a look at the chat as it's pinging along. But the last question I've got is from Sebastiano. Sebastiano, I don't know if you can put your camera on or whether I'll just go ahead and read that question for you.
Yeah, I'm here, sorry. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that my question is about if someone is at the idea stage, so feasibility, so TRL 1 or 2, and hasn't already founded a company yet, how can this person kickstart this project, which is about renewable energy? So, testing, even through 3D modeling, virtual modeling, the design, and create a proof of concept, and then progress through the scale of TRL.
Yeah, well, as I said, you're going to have to be a registered limited business, and you're going to have enough funds in place to demonstrate that you can kind of support and cash flow that project before you can draw down the grant funding that comes from it. Now, where that funding comes from doesn't really matter. It could be a director's loan, so you put your own money into it as a director's loan. It could be through investment, if you're able to, but through bank funding. It's probably an unlikely option because banks are unlikely to fund quite R&D projects. So it doesn't matter where the money comes from. It could be crowdfunding, it could be friends and family, however you source it. But you certainly need to have that business registered as a limited company in order to make any application to anybody.
I was aware that there are some possibilities, but they are like so tiny and there aren't so many of them but actually like it's the person or the project or the idea that you can get probably not just the money, the cash in hand, but you can get, you know, some kind of vouchers so you can, you know, invest just to kickstart the project, you know. And
yeah, I mean, there used to be kind of smaller schemes around it available, like innovation vouchers, but even then you need to be a limited business to apply for those, you know. So even quite small pots of money, it has to force you down the route of being a limited business. And this might, because I did notice another question from Jen about 50k 100% funded, because one of the early stage Innovate UK project or grant calls that are around at the moment is what they call transformative industries or transformative projects. And this is for where a company's not applied for Innovate UK before, and they will actually give you £50,000 and give you 70% of that in the first month. And it's about supporting those early stage companies who are going to struggle to cash flow a very good project. So that's quite a good option for companies. Then they have certain themes. There is some healthcare themes in there as well as AI and some other strands that you can kind of look into seeing whether it's applicable to you.
Because I think that's the problem. Like basically, if you want to apply for a grant, of course you must have founded company legally established, of course. But that's the problem, because it's not a burden that everybody is willing to take even before to start the journey. I mean, you want to be, you know, I don't want to say sure 100%, but you know, funding a company means that after after 1 year you have to submit some documents, and if you do a mistake, then you have to pay the consequences. Everybody knows. So it's like sort of loop in which, you know, you want to find your space gap. But
So
it's complicated, I know.
Unfortunately, no way around that.
Yeah.
There's probably more to follow with that conversation, Sebastiano, and you probably want to follow up with one of the one-to-ones, but I'm aware that we're coming to the top of the hour now. So it's great that we've filled that session full of questions. And Jen, I'd like to say congratulations on being an Innovate UK Women in Innovation winner. That's fantastic. Well done. And I'd like to say thank you to everybody for taking the time to participate in the session today. Lovely questions coming from all directions, which is really great. Thank you to Ian for stepping in and delivering the TBAT presentation and fielding all of those questions. As Ian has said, we will email details about one-to-one 30-minute sessions with one of the senior business development managers over at TBAT over the coming days. And I'd just like to say two more things. Our next SME support session from Arise Innovation Hubs and Medilink Midlands will be on the 26th of April after Easter, focusing on intellectual property. And we will send more information around on that after the session. And secondly, incoming for spring 2023 is the first Arise business funding programme, where we will have small pots of money to put into local SMEs with innovative ideas. And more information will come out on that and how we're working with Medilink on that. So there's so much more to follow. Please do keep following us, keep in touch with us, get in touch if you'd like to come into the innovation hubs and chat to us. And thank you very much. I've gone 1 minute over time, terrible timing, but thank you to everybody and have a lovely day.
Thank you.